The Collective Whisper Podcast with Simon K. Hello and welcome to the Collective Whisper Podcast. I am your host, Simon K. And today we have a great show lined up for you. We have some amazing guests. Today we are going to be talking to the Galway Rape Crisis Centre, and we'll have two special guests from there, Michelle Caulfield and Susan Costello, who both work with the Galway Rape Crisis Centre for many years now. And they're going to tell us all about how the organisation is run and how they do their fundraising, how they get volunteers to help them, everything involved in the whole process. And of course, also we're going to talk about the consequences of rape, the statistics of rape in this country and around the world, because rape is one of these things that is prevalent in society still. And with the advent of social media and more pornography and television and movies and everything, we have an overabundance of rape, and it's a bad thing, and we need to try and address this with our young people and with our adolescents and also college goers and adults. And we need to inform people that if they are in a situation where they have been raped or a victim of sexual assault, they can go to centres like the Galway Rape Crisis Centre for help. So we urge people, listen to the show, listen to the girls speaking, listen to the things they tell you, because if it helps you, then that's what we want. We want to help you, and we want to highlight this situation as it is in Ireland and around the world. So thank you for joining us today, and this is a very important conversation. So let's go over and talk to Michelle and Susan. Okay, so today I'm joined by Michelle Caulfield, the Training and Education Manager with the Galway Rape Crisis Centre, and Susan Costello, the Fundraising and Communications Manager with the Galway Rape Crisis Centre also. So welcome to the show, ladies.
Thanks, lovely to be here, Simon. Thanks for having us.
So ladies, we're talking kind of today about GRCC, the Galway Rape Crisis Centre, and we're talking about its origin, the work it does, and how it's changed over the years. So Michelle, let me start with you. You've been with the organisation for over 20 years, and you've seen it kind of evolve. Can you tell us a little about the history of when it started?
I can indeed. So the Galway Rape Crisis Centre, which is the second largest centre in Ireland after Dublin, opened its doors first in 1984 in a tiny, tiny little space in Mary Street. And then we moved on to Augustine Street, and then we moved to the Claddagh. So at the moment we're in another area and moving back. We'll be moving back to the Claddagh hopefully in a couple of years.
So you moved back to the Claddagh?
We'll be moving back to the Claddagh. So we were very fortunate to be given a house in the Claddagh, and we outgrew it. So we had to move up to the Sisters of Mercy in the old Magdalen Laundry. So we're presently there at the moment, and we hope to move back home to the Claddagh in about a year and a half when we have built our forever home, we're calling it, because once we get there, hopefully we're done. But it would have been a volunteer. It was people were really, there was a group of women who were simply horrified at the lack of services for victims of sexual violence in our little city at the time. So they came together as a volunteer group and set it up. And I believe it was like half a house, and then it was a full house, and they were tiny. It was the old little townhouses in Galway from many years ago. But we've grown from that to a fully fledged service with departments. I believe there's 32 of us in total now. Vast majority, I'd say about maybe 17 of those do our core work, which is the counselling work. So we've grown, hugely grown, absolutely. We're very, very proud of the team and where we are, and more so again in the last 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
We're a fully fledged service, and our core is long and short-term counselling for people from the age of 14 right up to 84, actually. So yeah, very proud of our work family. Yeah.
Obviously, as I was looking at your websites and then, other pages about rape in Ireland and the kind of the, not stats as such, but the organisations, like you said, the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. But it's a shame, really, isn't it? Because a lot of these organisations are non-governmental. They're like NGOs. And obviously, you're always kind of looking for funding. And, Susan, your job, obviously, looking for funding all the time. It's quite difficult. So even though the state says they're doing a lot for this kind of thing in the modern age, these organizations have to do a lot of their own work, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah. Like, I mean, about 80% of our services are funded. So there's always the deficit to be made up. So we'd have to go to the community, the local community, businesses, people within the community to help us to find those funds. Our services are continually growing. As Michelle said, we're the second biggest in the country. So we're expanding really quickly and the demand for our services has increased. So therefore, our funding needs have increased as well, to meet those demands. So yeah, it's quite challenging to come up with new ideas and stuff like that, especially after COVID. We had such a change in the fundraising scene. A lot of our fundraising before that was community based. So you'd have the usual like flag days, church gate collections, and events within the community, and they just ground to a halt more or less during that period of time. So for a small organisation like GRCC, we had to go and develop really an online presence in terms of our fundraising to try to keep our income streams open and our fundraising streams open. So that was a challenge for a small group like ourselves, comparable to the bigger organisations. So that was quite a challenge.
When you have like the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and you have like the Galway Rape Crisis Centre, and I know there's some other organisations, and does it get any way competitive, or do you guys like tend to work together well? Because if you're having fundraising campaigns and the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, you're focusing them on Galway, but you're also focusing them nationwide. So if they're doing something at the same time, I'm sure there can be overlapping, that kind of way.
And that wouldn't be an issue now that we would have, really, which is interesting, because we would focus primarily on Galway City and County in terms of our fundraising, because there's other fundraising centres like Mayo, Sligo that surround Galway as well. And we would just focus our attention in County Galway because, well, that's just how it's always been. And in terms of competing, then that doesn't come into play, particularly pre-COVID. That would have been the case because it's within your own community that you're fundraising. I suppose that would have crossed over maybe if you're doing online campaigns and stuff like that, and you would be competing against not just like rape crisis centres, but you're competing against big organisations, big charities that are well-known, national charities that would have like a team of social media people that are experts in this area. So that was challenging, and you're competing against the big players then, and you are going to the same pot of people that they are reaching as well. So that way you lose your identity a little bit online, because the people that you would have had connection with within your own community, we lost that during COVID because we weren't present out in the community in the physical sense. Of course, the services were still continuing. So that was a big challenge for us to compete with the bigger charities and the resources that they had, but not with the other rape crisis centres, because they all focus on their own areas.
Because you can sometimes see it. I know in the past, if I've done any podcasts with, like suicide groups or different groups like that, sometimes there isn't a competition kind of thing, or no one's a threat to each other's fundraising. But obviously you can see it doesn't matter if someone is running a fundraiser, whether it's just an ordinary person, and someone starts running a fundraiser for the same type of thing, they are already competing for people's donations. So you can see it on a larger scale too, that the online presence could overlap with other campaigns, couldn't it?
Absolutely. I suppose we're very blessed like that our supporters, supported us all through COVID, pre-COVID, after COVID, if you call it after COVID. I suppose competition is competition, because all charities are underfunded. All charities have great causes. So, we are going to the same people time and time again, looking for their support. So you can call it, I suppose, competition if you want, but people are very generous, and we've been very lucky that, our supporters are so loyal and they recognise the value of our services and the need for our services. So they do time and time again support us. So we're lucky in that regard, I suppose, Simon,
I would go as far as saying we're very lucky to have Susan. because the vast amount of rape crisis centres don't even have a fundraiser. It's done through small teams of volunteers. That was one of my earlier jobs when I joined the centre first. We couldn't have afforded to even consider having a professional role of fundraising. So there's 16 rape crisis centres. I would say possibly 3 or 4 might be lucky enough to have a fundraiser. Somebody that can lead the campaigns, lead the flag days, lead the church day, and create fundraising. And in terms of competition, it doesn't happen, would you believe? We're very connected and close to the other centres in terms of the clinical work. We would get trainings together to try and cut the costs in that. We would do stuff with Mayo all the time, and there's a managers forum, and they're always moving forward and connecting and working with TUSLA and looking at getting more money in from government, so section 56 and 39. So we don't have that competitive piece, which is, as you say it, I'm surprised, because it's actually not there. But who we're competing with is the big glossy guys who I won't name, but we all know them, who have teams of fundraisers all the time, So yeah, I would actually, it's a great question, because I don't think there's maybe 3 of the 16 centres would be lucky enough to have a fundraiser. So they just get stuck in a funding hunch, and that's kind of it. They're left with long waiting lists. There's nobody coming in with money unless, again, they're lucky enough to be involved in the business community. And the public have gotten really good at funding, actually. They've gotten better. But for the most part, I wish there was a big, huge amount of cash that we're all fighting for, but there actually isn't. Genuinely, there isn't.
The problem is with fundraising, in a brutally honest kind of way, is that in the past there have been organisations in Ireland who have fallen by the wayside because of corruption within it. And I remember speaking to Colin Farrell, and he did his suicide awareness thing and the Stamp Out Suicide, but in the end then he was ripped off by the money by one of the fundraisers. So it's a very shocking thing. And I know, obviously, when you have NGOs, they're having, they're supporting a great cause, and then people are giving the money. So there's a real level of trust. But when that trust is broken, sometimes people can be really hurt by it. And so if another NGO starts up, or an NGO, changes its name or does whatever, I'm sure people go, well, no, I'd stick with my own charity because I've been with this for years and stuff. So it's a kind of it can be a bit of a minefield sometimes, can't it?
Yeah. I mean, we've everybody remembers the bad news, the horror stories and the CEOs on 150,000 a year, and that stays with you. And I mean, people that work in a charity, it hurts us all. It makes Susan's job so much bloody harder, to be honest. But I mean, I can give you an example. The last 4 people that have come on board from our own director have taken cuts in salaries. They've left private sectors and the education sector, and they've come to work with us and literally taken cuts in salaries to do what it is they do. And even just very qualified trauma therapists that could go out into the world and earn a hell of a lot more money stay in the centre doing the work that we do. So we're not motivated by money. We're very underfunded, as Susan said.
It's more of a vocation.
It truly is. And there's our CEO is worth 3 times what she actually gets, and that's how hard she works. She genuinely, and we all are. But you've kind of gotten this piece of this patriarchal piece, and where a woman's charity is never going to be as wealthy as a charity that's covering all. And to say that 9 to 10% of our clients are male, so that it's really important. We support and take care of male survivors who have been violated by men and women. But ultimately, we're doing a phenomenal service to our government, and we're saving them millions in all that we do. And to get more money is really, really important to us. And we couldn't survive without our local, putting their hands in their pocket.
How would it change if the government came to, let's say, your organisation or the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and said, we want to take what you're doing and make it into a governmental organisation with the same teams, everything, but state funded? Is that something that you would simply work really well, or you'd say, no, that will actually be more complicated? How would that kind of work if it ever happened?
I don't see that as being complicated. I think, we have a phenomenal system for really good value for money. So I suppose if they could give us more money to do that well and pay all levels, that would be better. And maybe we could tackle the waiting lists that are consistent. We just get on top of waiting lists and they fill back up. again, 45% of our clients presently are people between the ages of 14 and 24. So, would we take more money? Yes. I don't think we would need to change that system. We just need to be more financially backed in a way.
More funding in the right areas.
Yeah, so more like on par even with our national counselling service, that would be amazing, who also have phenomenal waiting lists and all the rest. But, we just really need to invest more in mental health, because that's what we're working with ultimately, with sexual trauma. Inevitably, left alone, the long-term effects of mental health are widespread in our communities. And if we don't get to those people, that just gets worse, not better.
I'll just add to that what Michelle is saying. It's absolutely right. And one of the things that we're working on at the moment is to get the information out there about what exactly Galway Rape Crisis Centre does. While counselling is like forefront of our services, there's so much more that to the organisation. Michelle is involved in the education and training, going into schools, and lots of other stuff going on at the moment that we want to get out to the wider community and let people know exactly what it is that we do. So we want to just create a link with the community where they can get to see, where we can tell them the story behind the name, so that they're familiar, so that the Galway Rape Crisis Centre is one of those organisations that you would think of supporting, that it's not left to the side because of the content that we deal with. You mentioned there, Simon, about suicide and that. And I think maybe 10 years ago, the whole notion about suicide and that wasn't talked about enough. And now it's very much talked about in schools, in the media. It's much more acceptable to talk about that type of content. So for the content that we deal with, abuse, sexual abuse, trauma, and a whole lot more besides that, it's content that people are sometimes nervous of, afraid of, and we have to get it out there into the wider community so people are more relaxed, more open about speaking about the subject matter. And I think once we do that, I think we'll get more people involved in supporting us. So it's nearly a double-edged sword. It's about people becoming more acceptable of speaking about sexual trauma, sexual abuse, and not hiding away from it. And then in turn, that will help us get more people to support us with our fundraising and that. So it's like it has a knock-on effect. So I think for us, actually creating a positive story around what we do is really important. And that's a piece of work that we're working on at the moment, is to get that message across.
They're all really good points, because every part of the process is necessary. But there's one part, obviously, that I would like to talk more about today, okay? Lots of things aren't talked about with stuff. So let's kind of get to the nitty-gritty and say, with Michelle, I saw there actually yesterday where rape is kind of classified. There's like rape and then rape section 4. There's different classifications in the legal system for rape, isn't there? So, and obviously that can lead to complications when it comes to prosecuting, and also complications for the victims, because whether it be male or female, it's a different story, because obviously with a lot of rape cases, the majority of the victims are women and a lot of the perpetrators are male. So is it classified now? Is the classification of this thing getting better or worse?
It needs an awful lot of work, Simon. It's quite an old, archaic system in so many ways. So, God, where do I even start? Our entire legal system needs education.
Yeah.
It doesn't, and it's case by case, so nothing is concrete and nothing. It really is like 4% actually gets into a court of law. I have to say it is getting better, obviously. The age of consent, child sexual abuse, all of these things are lines and things that people are finally talking about. The media are reporting it better because there's somebody else that didn't always do any service to victims by how they reported it. But the system itself, in terms of legality, it doesn't matter about classification. It doesn't. Those things are completely irrelevant in terms of how we hold and how we manage victims of sexual violence going through our systems. And that's our legal system, our the guards even, who again vastly improved. I could spend hours talking about how things are actually getting better. Things are improving. But by the time a person gets to a sexual assault treatment unit and does a few crisis counselling pieces with us, they're more apt to report. But if you were to walk in as a survivor of sexual violence into a Garda station right now, most Garda stations don't have somebody specifically that they can report to. Now, again, we're very lucky in Galway. There's, I believe, 5 preventive services that you can go to. But for the most part, our guards are not qualified to manage this crime well. And that's a problem.
When you say a survivor, because if you walk into a sexual assault treatment unit, that's a rape or a violation that has happened recently. Yeah, very recently.
Yeah.
But a survivor is like a cold case where it's something that happened in their past or when they were younger. So you don't have the treatment part of it.
So our sexual assault treatment unit is open. I think it's coming up on 10 years. And research says that if we can get a victim through the sexual assault treatment unit, through the forensic, through the team, the supportive team, we train the psychological support workers, and Sarah Jane manages that. If we can get that system, get somebody to that system, everything is better. The healing, the medical health, the sexual health, the chances that they'll actually go ahead and report and take a crime through into the legal system. Without that support, it doesn't happen. And that's a tragedy, because if we don't have more people reporting and going through the system, then nothing will change. Unfortunately, we have that kind of a system in Ireland where things need to be happening and we need data and we need the research to make a change and make things make it different. So the sexual assault treatment unit is great for that. But we now have a protective service unit in Galway. I believe there's 3 people in that. They need probably 23 people in that, truth be known. So, as I said, it is absolutely improving, but the criminal system is so old and so, it just doesn't work. You know, the rape victim has to prove that he or she didn't consent to
right,
it.
yeah.
So, you know, it's a complex crime at the best of times. And as I said, the sexual assault treatment unit makes
right.
everything more accessible. It is changing. It is. And I'd hate to leave anybody with the impression that it's not. It is. It's improving.
I imagine that in cases that are involving more adults and non-consensual sex, a lot of the time alcohol or drugs can be involved. Whereas with younger people, it's more sexual abuse or rape by a family member or, you know, a family friend, this kind of stuff. So you have different kind of areas of clarity in a sense, because obviously if there's alcohol and drugs involved, people have lapses in memories and they're not sure of all the details, but they know something happened.
Yeah, so 83 or 84% of the time, when you have somebody that has suffered a sexual assault, either perpetrator or victim will be heavily intoxicated. But luckily now written into law, you can no longer use that against somebody in a court of law. So that's really good. Those are some of the changes that have happened. In terms of statutory rape or peer on peer, so 40% of all sexual crime against children is peer on peer, so a sibling or a friend in or around a year or 2 years old. So the incidents, I think one of the myths that are still out there is that stranger rape is common, and in reality, would you believe it's not? Stranger rape is a rare enough occurrence and very easy to report and very easy to get a conviction and very easy process through the criminal system very quickly. The more complex cases is when the sexual abuse happens within a family, within a marriage or a relationship. So the vast amount of perpetrators are well known to the victim. So in school, in college, working together, married or ex-partners. So that makes it much more complex. You know, it's very, very easy for any of us to walk into a Garda station and report a stranger having committed any kind of sexual crime. It's much different if you've been married to that person, dating that person, in college with that person. And the vast amount of sexual assault and rape happens within relationships. So that's the uncomfortable conversation that we need to be having.
See, this is the thing, isn't it? Because, you know, obviously you're the education manager and, you know, in society in general, and I don't even want to just say just for men, because there's a part of it as well where mothers and women and sisters of perpetrators are involved. But when I say about the first part is that obviously men and fathers and grandfathers have to take a role now in educating their family members. And I actually read a case recently in the States where this guy was on a forum and he said, my son told me that he raped a girl at a party and it was an accident, this happened. But he said he told me and his mother, and I said, we have to go to the police. We have to act on this. And the mother was the one that stopped it, and she said, no, no, no. So I see this a lot in Spain here, where there's this kind of machismo, this sexism. But what happens is you get a lot of rape cases and violations and stuff. The perpetrators are men, and let's say the victims are women. But what happens is that the mothers are the first ones to protect their sons. And it's like this vicious circle, because girls here have a fear of men for that kind of reason. But then when they become mothers, they add to the problem.
Lovely machismo, yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, we could go through the cultures and possibly Irish mothers. I think generally speaking, Simon, women can be very hard on women. It's that misogynistic,
judgmental,
deeply ingrained, not my son. You know, it's like that somebody else does that. My son doesn't do that. And that protection piece is huge and damning and very damaging. And what we would see a lot with the peer-on-peer sexual assault within families is, shockingly, to this day, the parents or the mother will take the side of the perpetrator rather than the victim. So this is how deeply ingrained that one would put their son above their daughter. Victim, I personally have seen that at least 7 or 8 times within my own caseload over the years. So that's pretty shocking.
It's a family shame thing.
Generation. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, let's say if we look at men and women, half and half. But then the thing is, the women, when they're younger, you know, they can be maybe more of the victims. But the problem then for some women, as they become older and become mothers, they have to accept the responsibility of what their children do. So that's why it's like a vicious circle, because, as you said, even a mother, I don't know if this is true, but I can imagine that there have been cases where a mother may have been a victim of sexual abuse as a child or as a young woman. But then when it comes to taking responsibility for her own son's actions, maybe that motherly love is stronger than what had happened to her in the past. You know what I mean? You would imagine that she would say, no, I was a victim. You cannot do this to anybody. But sometimes that motherly love is so strong that it can hide the shame and put it under the carpet.
I suppose that's something nearly that it's passed down, isn't it? It's sort of a cultural thing.
Yeah.
It's cultural. It's like, it's what's acceptable. And I suppose what you're saying, Simon, it's ingrained in people, and change has to come about from men and women, I think. Not, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's more deeply ingrained in that. I think, you know, when somebody grows up as a survivor of sexual violence, you can compartmentalize that really well, and you can be heavily conditioned into thinking, sure, look, I'm okay, they'll be okay, you know. So it's a much deeper thing, and they tend to fall back into that victim piece of, I didn't protect my child, I didn't do enough, it had happened to me, I should have known better, what was I thinking? Very vulnerable dynamic, really, really vulnerable dynamic, and we try very hard not to create more victims around everybody else. But you are so right, it's a conversation in that where females aren't, like, we do need to take responsibility for our sons and admit that this is happening, you know. And our statistics in Ireland at the moment is that 1 in 3 will have a negative experience before they reach the age of 21. So it's somebody's son, it's somebody's partner and husband and father and grandfather. And the culture that we live in, that rape culture, is thriving. It's absolutely thriving. So the piece of not my son is not cutting it anymore, because it's somebody's son all the time. Yeah.
That it was their fault in some way, nearly.
We see there how there's not enough kind of safeguards for victims and everything. For young boys who, you know, are not perpetrators, but maybe are on the road to becoming a perpetrator, or, you know, are having sexual thoughts that they don't understand, or there obviously is a path there too. And people are like saying, oh, well, you can't be looking at the perpetrator's state of mind and you can't be defending them. But the thing is, it's like every mental health disease or everything. If you get somebody who is on the verge of making a mistake and you can stop them making that mistake in the future, that's what we want to be doing, isn't it?
So that's really possible, and it's part of why I'm still with the Galway Rape Crisis Centre. I'm very, very passionate about the education piece, and research will suggest over and over that if we can get to that perpetrating mind at 13, 14 and 15, we can make a massive difference. So thus far in the Western world, from Spain to East Europe to America and Canada, we're not educating our boys, and they're in a different kind of trouble. They're in a very toxic environment. Most of them are learning about sexuality and relationships through pornography. And even if they're not accessing pornography, their peers are accessing pornography. 38% of Irish females are learning about sex and how they're supposed to do sex through pornography. So, if they had access to what I keep hearing is good pornography, I have this conversation with people all the time. That's, I'm sure good pornography is great.
Like, because if someone said, if people are talking to each other and they said, "Oh, I saw some good porn at the weekend," they're thinking it's just good quality. But what they're not thinking is it's actually consensual and more helpful. And
condoms. What are we doing next? Consent. Are you okay with this? I'm okay with this. But the reality is, it's the difference between buying designer jeans and picking up your tenner jeans and pennies. Our 14 and 15-year-olds don't have access to good pornography. If they did, I'm all for it. In fact, I'd rather introduce good pornography with all of the good things that come with good sex and get rid of the hardcore horror stories that they're actually watching, which is really ugly stuff. And it's not, years ago in my age, you'd have to go looking for it. Now it's bombarded and coming at them.
We laugh sometimes because, I was talking to a guy one day there, and we were talking about that, the availability of pornography for younger people. And the thing is, now it's like it's on a tap, whereas we used to always laugh when we were younger. You would hear of somebody having a videotape going around the village, and someone would be like, "Oh, can I get it next?" So it was like a waiting list. Whether it was good or bad, it was like the most sought after thing, or a magazine or something. So now, I mean, the problem is that there's too much availability, and there's no filters in the sense, because a young person can look at something and maybe it's fine, but then it's what else is in there that leads them to something else.
You know what? The looking at something is absolutely fine. When I think back, I mean, I remember looking at Playboy and seeing magazines for the first time. They're art.
Yeah.
So they're absolutely beautiful pictures, but what they're seeing is so extremely violent and so hardcore, and the more dangerous. I'll give you an example that shocked a group of parents the other day. The most sought after porn, so they can read this through the algorithms, I suppose, in the internet. The most sought after porn throughout the Western world right now is mother-son porn.
Okay. Wow.
So when you have 11 and 12-year-olds accessing that accidentally, they don't have an emotional context for something.
So it's more like taboo.
And it's deeply, deeply traumatizing if you don't have a context and you don't have language or an understanding. And the last thing you're going to do is go to your parents, because the first thing they'll do is take the phone or the iPad off you, because now you've come into some really dark stuff. So the kids are smarter than that. They don't want to have their iPhone or their smartphone, so they don't say anything. And they keep watching this horrible.
Yeah, that raises like a deeper question, doesn't it? Because we all know, like, people have this conversation about, let's say, if a girl has a good father, as an example, there's tendency sometimes to look for a partner, if she is into men, that's somewhat similar to her dad. There's characteristics and traits. So obviously men do the same thing with women. They'll look for somebody who maybe subconsciously reminds them of their mother. But in that kind of situation, if your mother finds porn in your computer, but if your mother finds mother and son porn, that's really deeply embarrassing.
Yeah,
that's
a bad Sunday afternoon.
It's a weird dynamic then between the mother and son.
Well, I would have to say mother rarely finds out. There's great lengths gone to that, that mother doesn't find out. But that's just one example of the horror, that there's no control. Once they're in that dark world, more and more obscene, taboo, dangerous stuff comes at them. And it also sets up, like pornography is, everybody in pornography is stunningly beautiful and well endowed and exaggerated. Like, I will ask, I go into schools and I will ask groups of what is the average length of penetration time in straight couples across the Western world, and there'll be 20 minutes, 25 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes, and you're like, you're definitely watching porn, folks, because it's nothing close to that. Then and then women are trying to dress like with or all the fake tan or piercings. They're doing things that they're seeing in pornography, and they're acting and behaving in a way that pornography is set up to set women up. So you have these young people not getting educated, being visually stimulated by this hardcore pornography. So it's a disaster and a crash waiting to happen.
For me, the new type of pornography is TikTok.
Yes, absolutely.
Because the problem is that, like, I do say this sometimes to people, we have this society now where, there's the Me Too movement and we're trying to have equality and, there's all these movements towards women's rights and everything. But then on the other hand, you have this degradation of women by themselves because they want to be as good as other girls, and especially young girls. And what's happening is, especially for young boys, they're seeing these beautiful girls and very sexy and everything. And these girls have this really tremendous pressure to look like this. And, I'm going to say this straight out loud. A guy said to me one day, and I was teaching an English class, and he said, in America, they call it big titty TikTok. And I said, why? And he said, because the bigger your boobs are, the more popular you are. And the truth is, that is true. In society, the better looking you are, the sexier your body, the more popular you can be on these kind of sites. And unfortunately, that's fine for those girls who are popular, but for the girls who are not, it leads to this really insecure feelings. And then it also leads boys to think this is the perfect woman, where it's exaggerations. And young girls are getting cosmetic surgery to be TikTok stars. So for me, that's the new type of pornography.
It is, and it's very mainstream. It's all over their phones, it's all over their TVs, it's all over advertising. And it's doing untold amounts of damage in terms of anxiety levels, mental health, sexual disorders, confusion around sexuality has never been more. We've never had more information in terms of how we need to be educating our children socially, emotionally, and sexually. But they're meeting some hardcore life stuff that's just really unfair because we're not preparing them for all of this. They're living online and they're living through TikTok. Very superficial, very sexualized, and just really ugly. It's a really ugly world that they're going through.
Adults can understand it, but can see it.
Yeah, we have context.
If an adult has a good rationale and they know the difference between, a sexual content, hardcore sexual content, whatever, and they are in a good place, they can say, okay, this is too much or that's whatever. But the thing is, if kids see this, they can't know, is this right? Is this normal? Should I be aiming for this?
They have no emotional context. They don't have a language. They're not prepared for it. We need to be preparing kids at 8 and 9 and 10 for living online because that's what they're doing. That's their world. So we're at 7 years of age, we're handing them this World Wide Web on a screen and having no preparation for what they're actually going to be looking at. So, pornography addiction is the second after gambling in Ireland. So that will give you an idea. We have the most screens per head of population, I think, probably in the world. But yeah, pornography addiction is the second most common addiction after gambling in Ireland.
Wow. And that, obviously, when you talk about the numbers, and, I know that in a lot of third level institutions, that, there can be a lot of rape cases and everything because of, non-consent and alcohol and everything. But when you consider the progression, these teenagers who are learning about sex from social media and from pornography and then go to college or university and then get introduced to real sex, but want it to be something different or expect it to be something different. And then obviously when alcohol or drugs are involved, it's a whole different story. And then people make mistakes and they say, oh, I'm sorry, I did that. I didn't realize I was so drunk, but the crime has been committed, hasn't it?
Well, I wish they did wait until they were college age, Simon, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, there are cases in junior level in secondary schools.
Wow.
All over the world. Yeah. No, it's, what is it? When the social brain goes into secondary school, it picks up, we're just ingrained to socialize and meet other human beings and think about entering into, an intimate relationship with somebody else. So this is all starting earlier than it ever did before. So it's like literally 13, 14 and 15. The age of consent in Ireland is 17, but we know that somewhere around 50% of 15 and 16-year-olds are sexually active. So this is a bigger problem than college. College is where you actually go out into the adult world. And it is a very vulnerable time, actually, going into college. But unfortunately, we live in such a hypersexualized culture that 15 and 16-year-olds, that's what we're looking at now in terms of going into sexual relationships, maybe and not ready for them. But yes, pornography has an awful lot to answer for, because that's where the education is happening.
So, Michelle, when you, in your training and stuff, like, what's your kind of general modus operandi? Do you go to schools, or do you do training in centres, or how do you kind of train people? Where does it happen?
So we were lucky enough to receive some funding 6 years ago through the Manuela Foundation, and we started a research piece. And I was in Galway, I was the project worker in Galway, and we also had a project worker in Wexford, Kerry and Dublin. So we did a huge piece of research about what works well in terms of sex education and what doesn't. And it was highly successful, and it's now gone on to its second trench. But what works well is, so much works well. It's like getting in there. First of all, so I'm going to pre-warn you, I could talk about this all day long.
No, it's fine. That's what we're here for.
So we have an 8 to 10 hour program that we do with kids. And what we found out in the research is by the time we're doing it in TY, which is averaging 15, 16 years of age, we're 2 years too late. So now...
Okay, wow, in TY. Wow.
So now we're going into second years. So we look at consent, sexual violence, prevention of sexual violence. They do workshops around all of this. We do pornography walking debates, consent walking debates. We get them working with themselves. They would ideally prefer a stranger like me to come into their classroom and facilitate conversations, give them stuff, talk to them in real time. They don't want their parents by the time they get to this age. Those two things are not supposed to be happening in the same room. So ideally, you would have one parent at home doing really good education. But in reality, I know my own 14-year-old refused to listen to me. He was great up to about 13, listened, we conversed, and by the time he got to 14, I got the hand in my face. You are not allowed to say 3-letter words and be in the same room and talk to me about all of that. They'd much rather, the educational settings are there. So why don't we go in, and do this and start? And we can start with consent and body autonomy. We can do all of those things in national school. And we can then just bring in the sexual piece around the 12, 13, 14. And we upgrade as they go along. So the Irish government, they are doing a really good job in the schools. My only problem with it is they're ready to go. They've updated the content. They've included pornography and consent, and the language is there and the exercises are there. However, 80% of the teachers don't want to do it. They don't feel equipped. They don't feel educated. They're not comfortable talking about pornography in a classroom with 30 kids. So the next piece that we'd love to be involved with down the road is training the teachers to do this well.
Can I ask you a question there? Because I read there a couple of years ago that in the Netherlands, they introduced pornography to kids at 11 and 12. But the schools do it, but it's actual pornography they introduce to the schools. So they watch it. And what they're trying to do is create this openness about pornography, that it's not a taboo subject by the time they get to 14 or 15. And even, I think it could be even younger. But because again, look, let's be honest, the sex education videos, when you put them on, you're not going to put on porn. You're not going to say, I'm going to show you a real sexual event and a porn event, because the school would be like, no, you can't put that on or whatever. But if kids, even if they said, I'm going to leave the room, let you guys watch it, and they might joke. But the point about it is, sometimes when we have examples and we have training things, we can't actually be very open and talk about the real thing. We can't show the real videos or whatever because of law and because of taboo things. It's quite difficult, isn't it?
It is difficult. And with parental consent, and of course we know they do things so well in the Netherlands. So I have read about that. And what that is not pornography as we might know pornography, but it's videos showing what real sex looks like. So it's not fabricated or it's not edited. It's real people with real shapes and small penises and small boobs and big boobs, the whole lot. And it's real. And it's, you wouldn't even consider it pornography, I think, by our standards. So
it would more be like erotic.
Yeah, this is what happens. This is, and it works really well. And it's not, it's done in a safe environment. There's parental consent. There's facilitators in the room in case anybody upset or has questions or so. And it's not pornography. It's like, this is what sex looks like with a real body. And so you won't end up in a court of law showing children under the age of 17.
No, because that's the thing, isn't it? Teachers would be like, are you crazy?
Yeah, it just wouldn't happen. It just wouldn't happen.
They obviously made a conscious decision in the Netherlands that if we do it the right way, we get parental consent. But in Ireland, because the church obviously is heavily involved in society, they'd be like, no, it could never happen. And you're kind of thinking a lot of people would say, well, if it stopped my son or daughter being a perpetrator in the future, for any reason, I mean, why not? I mean, because what's the difference between looking in the classroom or looking on the phone outside?
With their peers.
With their peers, yeah.
Where they can laugh and ask questions. And, you facilitate a conversation that could be awkward anywhere else. But with the right trained person, it's nothing but good. And it gives them a context of what real sex looks like. Because it's not pornography, it's not pretty. So then they have a realistic expectation and understanding. And the other thing, bar perpetration or anything else, the level of body dysmorphia and eating disorders and women that hate their bodies at a very young age has escalated all through the Western world simply from watching pornography. Young women and young men, steroid use is up. They're all joining gyms, trying to lift power weight, trying to look like these extreme, pristine bodies.
Yeah, I noticed that. I hadn't been home in 2 years there with COVID, and I was home there about a month ago or so. I noticed certain people, that they're like a lot of overuse of the gym, and, there's a lot of emphasis on having, big legs and how you look and being like Thor and, this kind of stuff. But also what I noticed, which is another side avenue, is that I did a podcast recently on the cocaine use in rural Ireland, and I was very shocked by the amount of young people, and even talking to younger people that I know in Ireland, some of them were really frank with me, and they said, yeah, we all use cocaine, and cocaine is being used around the table. So obviously that is not just a gateway drug to others, but it's also a gateway to non-consensual sex.
Completely, and hypersexualized behavior. Absolutely. So, yeah, cocaine is now the beer.
Yeah, it's the beer of the new generation.
Again, it was our generation. Yeah, completely. Where we'd have been sneaking in beer, after a camogie match. They're now sneaking in cocaine and being very open about it, I believe, to the point it's really upsetting. They're taking it like we would have had a beer, and not even going into the bathroom anymore, like literally putting it down on the benches. And yeah.
No, and doing it 6 people around the table, and not being embarrassed if one of them's not doing it, because it's like this thing now where no, we're all doing it, and it's a social drug and da.
Used for weight loss, I might add. Irish women are using it to lose weight.
Yeah. What's interesting as well, more Irish women are using it, housewives, everything, because the problem is that the price of it has come way down. And, I couldn't believe when I was talking to the journalist about it, and she said, you have, cocaine deals being done in cowsheds in rural Ireland, And she said it's just totally changed. So when you look at that, you kind of think to yourself, if that's how much Ireland itself is changing, you can imagine the knock-on effects of that, and the bad knock-on effects like rape and do you know what I mean? Suicide, everything.
Everything. Drugs are obviously going to affect your mental health. If you're already vulnerable and you're choosing a lifestyle or being pressured to be part of a lifestyle. As I said, these, Irish women are using cocaine to lose weight. So it just sets up all kinds of really scary outcomes. And it's normalized, and there's pressure to do it. And, we lost a beautiful 19-year-old girl at a party here a couple of years ago, and then it was becoming quite normalized. But yeah, outside of all of the things we're talking about here, the effect on mental health is just extraordinary at the moment. It's snowballing into all kinds of disordered behavior and thinking, and it's ugly. Yeah, it's really, really ugly.
Because of the use of alcohol, not just in the perpetrators, but in the victims, because, people's inhibitions drop with alcohol, and more so sometimes with cocaine and drugs like this. So people make the wrong decisions, and it's a bit of a minefield, the whole consent and non-consent, and what alcohol was consumed and what drugs were consumed. But I can imagine the bureaucracy of it all, and obviously the victims getting these hard questions in court, like, were you high at the time? Were you on alcohol? And, where people can be saying, well, you agreed to it at the time when you were on drugs, but then you changed your mind. So this is very kind of a treacherous area for lawyers and the courts and the victims as well, isn't it? Because nothing is clear cut in that scenario when there's drugs and alcohol involved.
I suppose, Michelle, you know a bit more about that, would you?
It does. It complicates everything. Of course it does, just like alcohol complicates cases. But as I said, you can no longer use it against a victim. Because it's often used as an ingredient to groom and ply somebody with alcohol to get them to a vulnerable place or state to which, then you can sexually assault them. But does it complicate things? It can do. It can do, but I would say to anybody out there is not to worry about that. If you've had a few drinks, you're allowed to have it. You are allowed to get drunk. In an ideal world, you should be allowed to walk down a promenade in Spain or Ireland. But, we don't live in an ideal world. And I would say, regardless of what you feel you have done, whether you were on cocaine, smoked marijuana, or drank a bottle of wine, please, if you feel you've been sexually assaulted, get to a sexually assault treatment unit and get taken care of. That's more relevant than anything, because if we get very wrapped up in the cocaine and the alcohol, like, that's not the issue. It's an issue of mental health. So we have to be careful not to. Of course, the Belfast case, that lady had 3 drinks. The boys that did the damage on that particular evening in Belfast were high on other things and drinking, I think, for 2 days. She herself had just had 2 or 3 drinks. But we have to be really careful in not getting hooked up on that, because it's irrelevant, sober, drunk, high. If somebody makes the decision and chooses to sexually assault somebody else, it's irrelevant what the environment or the circumstances were. So we have to be so careful.
Yes, of course.
I suppose what it is as well is that there's so much external influence for young people through social media, and especially when COVID occurred, people became very isolated and they were accessing all their information, all their connections, everything was online. So they were relying on that for all their information, for all their knowledge and stuff. So a huge part of the work we do here is through the education and training, and it's vital to give these children tools to be able to make the right decisions around consent, around, what they want to do with their own bodies and stuff like that. And I think, we recognize that here. That's why we developed the education and training department. And it's a huge part of the work that Michelle does. So it's vital that we continue to develop that, and to be able to, all schools should have this program to be able to offer to students, and from second year on, I think, because these children need to have guidelines. They need to be able to open up. They need to have a support system in place that allows them to make right decisions, that gives them the confidence to make right decisions, because they've been bombarded on social media and being given wrong information, being given idealistic, ways on how they should look, on what they should think. And they need to be able to touch base and be given some really good, basic knowledge that they can use then going forward in their own life situations, that they know is, coming from a good source that has their interests at heart. Because social media is developed to either sell something to you, that you should look a certain way. There's all hidden agendas. So to have somebody come into a school that is there with their best interests, I think is huge. And, that's why I know Michelle is so passionate about it, is to be able to give these kids the skills and tools to make these right decisions for them. So it's really important, that part of our work. And again, as I mentioned earlier, is just to get what the Galway Rape Crisis Centre does is to get out into the wider community, that this is another part of our work that people might be aware of, that, we're dealing with the outcome of what happens when things go wrong, when it gets to that situation where we're dealing with the aftermath. And our approach is to try and tackle it, as you said, Simon, to inform and educate these people before they become a perpetrator. That is key. It's like anything, any illness. And I'm not saying that is an illness, but, prevention is better than cure. If you can start right there when you need to, which is second year or earlier, and get them there and give them the tools and skills to be able to, and space to be able to explore all these different things is key. And so, as Michelle mentioned,
Yes.
passion she has there for the education system and that, and training in the Galway Rape Crisis Centre is something that's fundamental to our vision. Yeah. So it's really important.
There's one thing, isn't it, that you kind of see it from different areas, whether it's mental health or suicide or, sexual assault, sexual violence. A lot of the time, kids don't want to be explained things where they feel like they're being talked down to or being patronized or, you don't understand us, like you mentioned with your 14-year-old. So I can imagine in those situations, the younger you can have good examples, and like young teachers, for example, they're great ambassadors for those kids, because you can get teachers in their 20s who could say, look at guys, I'm not that far away from you. Maybe I'm 7 years older than you or something, to 16, 17-year-olds. But that's what it is, because the closer they are in age, maybe the more they will listen.
Yeah, and as I said, like when they're learning together, that social, emotional, and sexual growth, you just need a good facilitator, regardless of age. I mean, obviously, it's far superior if you can get somebody in their 20s and 30s to do this work, but quite often they don't have the life experience, funnily enough, to have the confidence to do it. So my goal would be beyond even, it doesn't have to be zeroed in on sexual violence. So right now, a good piece of information is we know that Irish creches are bringing in autonomy, consent, anti-bullying, being kind. There's the foundation.
Yeah. Oh yeah. For at that age.
Yeah. And they're doing that in Irish creches.
Yeah.
They're actually doing that. So there's the foundation, and then we add and we build to that. And as I said, by the time they get to 5th and 6th, that's where they need a little bit of sex education around consent and touching somebody else's body, sharing intimate images, which is a regular occurrence in 5th and 6th class, sharing outrageous pornography to get a reaction.
Let's talk about that. So kids in 5th and 6th, like with phones, are sharing images of each other.
They're sharing sexualized images. They're going onto pornography websites and they're screenshotting stuff. They're going into OnlyFans and getting videos of like anal sex is the last one I heard. So it's the shock value of that. They're sending that onto each other. They're bringing it into school playgrounds and they're going, look, they're trying to sell it. I heard one story where a 6th class boy was selling images to 5th class boys. They're sending them on to girls and boys their age. This is the stuff that parents know nothing about. And it is happening consistently. As a 17-year-old said to me, God, Michelle, that's genius. It's like, okay.
What a clever business, and the mother never knows.
He'll be in global business, like 5 years
from now. Imagine if he has no scruples in 5th class, what he'd be like when he's 37.
Thank you. Yeah, he'll be running the pornography industry.
Yeah. He'll be trafficking and everything,
Yeah, the works. Like, so again, this is a culture that is thriving, and it's I'm not worried about him, Simon. I'm not worried about that guy.
Yeah.
I'm worried about the young men and women who have no scruples or have no concept of what's coming at them. They receive these images. They're in 5th class. They know they can't go to their teachers. They don't have a trusted adult they can have a conversation with. That escalates. Therein lies your severe anxiety and kids being diagnosed with depression at 14 and 15 years of age. They're already living in this horrible culture with no emotional context from one safe adult to do this well. And I say, like, 1 million kids go back to school every year in this country. 1 million children between the ages of 5 and 22. So they're going back to school and college. And at no point have adults, facilitators, education authorities come and go, you know what? We need to give them some emotional, sexual, social information. So our strive.
If you don't mind there, because I think that's something, like even when you've said it about the 5th and 6th class, but basically just by repeating what you said, because I think it's something that mothers should actually stop and take a look at. There are a lot of kids in 5th and 6th who are sending each other images of sexual images, pornography. And as you said, the mothers don't have a clue. So mothers who are listening, take note of this, because
And fathers, and fathers.
and fathers, exactly. Sorry, don't want to
Not just the
not
poor
include the
mothers.
dads,
Yeah.
but anybody who scrutinizes their kids' phones and thinks they know everything that's happening, take another look.
Yeah, and you'd want to be very good at technology to find this stuff.
Right.
They're put in files that are coded. They're minded.
Okay.
They're deleted when they no longer serve a purpose. The average parent doesn't know how to find this thing on their kids' phones. They are very good at this.
Wow, it's crazy, isn't it? So their minds, like obviously nowadays with technology and information, kids' minds are developing more, but it's the avoidance and they're managing to elude their parents' kind of knowledge of this.
Like they always have. It's they always have. Kids are always ahead of their parents. So if you want to safeguard, and I've used my own too, they're 21 and 18 now. You want to safeguard your children against all of this. Start talking to them at 4 and 5 and 7 and 9 and 10. So the first time that my son was sent pornographic images and sexual abuse images was 12 years of age, and he came to me. So I had created, a relationship all the way along from when he was very young. And there was many drives in cars where there was no eye contact, but lots of conversation around sex and sexuality. And a great pace to catch the Irish mail is the car, has to be said, or the promise of food at the end of the journey is always another good one. Because guaranteed, by the time that Irish male or female gets to 13 or 14, you're going to get the hand. Do not speak to me about sex or anything like it. So the window is to start at 4 and keep going in bits and pieces. So when a hip hop song that's talking about raping women comes on the radio, you can turn it up, not down, and go, what do you think of that? Do you hear those words? What do you think he's saying? Do you think he's angry?
Yeah.
Have a conversation. It's just a conversation. You don't need to be educated to have a conversation with your son or daughter. You don't, actually. You just need to care enough to get through the awkwardness to have the chat. And from that, he or she will come back to you the following week and go, Mom, do you know what I heard? Dad, did you see this in the newspaper? So it's about having that trusted adult that can create a space so that your child can emotionally develop through something. So that when he is hit with something horrendous at 14 or 15, he can go, Jesus, there's that crap again, and X out of it. No, because you've trained them emotionally, sexually, spiritually.
They're not so
this
shocked.
Open conversation. It's just a conversation. It's not difficult if you started earlier. Where it gets difficult is when you go sit them down at 12 to have the talk, and they could have done with that talk at 9.
It's like everything, whether it's racism or, gambling or anything, the more you educate people earlier, it's not such of a culture shock then when it comes along. So the problem is in the past, everything's been very taboo and, you hide things and you don't show them. And then people, get exposed to it and they get addicted or they want more of it because it's been hidden away from them. So as you said there, from 4 years of age, you start talking about things. And a really interesting thing is nowadays with this generation, I remember a few years ago talking to my kids and you start, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to start talking about relationships with boys and girls in school. But then you say to yourself, hold on, Simon, I have to rethink this, because you say to yourself, I have to also include the fact that one or two of them could turn out to be gay, right? So you have to say, is there any boys or girls or anyone you like in the school? And then you're kind of going, wow, this is, it's good, but it's something that you never imagined because you didn't have that with your parents. So, you always said, oh, is there any boys you like or any girls you like? And it was always the opposite sex. But nowadays you have to kind of talk about it like it could be someone of the same sex and in a very open way. And if you do that at an early age, we found we started doing that when they were young, and then it became a very natural thing. And like I always say, the great thing about young people nowadays is they can choose a sexuality, but they can also go back to the sexuality that you thought they were going to be. You can do whatever you like.
It's really, really normal developmentally to go through having crushes on the same sex. To have best friends who are the same sex as yourself, to have boy crushes on boys a couple of years older than you when you're male yourself. That's very developmentally normal. And it's where the whole bisexuality piece came from. So again, it's about your language, who you fall in love with regardless of their sex. So there's an awful lot of shame around boys liking other boys, and we need to stop that. We really do. It's not benefiting anybody.
Like you said, that conversation in the car where there's no eye contact, even if there isn't, if you still have it and you can find a way to talk about it, the more you do it, then one day there will be eye contact, and then it'll be a very open and honest thing, won't it?
Absolutely.
And we'll stop things
Absolutely.
happening.
Yeah, I mean, our children are very self-conscious. We will stop that. This is it. If we model acceptance and tolerance and understanding for that darker part of, developing sexuality, then they're able to come to you when they're in trouble. And that would be from a perpetrating piece or from a victimization piece or just living in the world that is so hypersexualized where they're feeling not enough. Then they can come to you and go, I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I don't know who I am. I can't eat anymore. I'm smoking. I'm drinking. So you've created a valve where you can go, you know what, let's look at this. Let's have a chat. And if we need to bring in outside help, we get outside help. And that piece is changing because there's a lot of Irish adolescents actually attending counselling. So that's a real big positive that's changed, again, in the last 10 years, is parents are reaching out.
It's not a thing that you're doing only if you feel you're sick. It's something that will help you in your ordinary life.
Yeah, developmentally, growing up is incredibly hard and quite traumatizing as well. So if you need a bit of help from an expert, somebody that can hold that and reassure and manage and care for, and then feed back to the parents that he or she are going to be absolutely fine. This is developmental anxiety. If you were growing up in the world he or she is growing up in, you'd be anxious too, very anxious. Because it's a very anxious world. So that's really good. Irish parents are going, okay, please, 6 sessions of counselling, and it can make all the difference to the developing mindset, whether that be sexually, developmentally, education-wise, friendship. Their world is incredibly complex, much more than it would have been when we were 16 and 17. Much, much more hard.
I want to talk obviously about your, Susan, your fundraising and stuff. But before I do, there's one thing that I want to kind of address is the whole area of consent, right? So you see now in some countries they have these consent hubs and consent applications and stuff. But in a theoretical world, consent is something that's given between two, respectable people. But also people have this thing where they say in the heat of the moment, like that it's a passion killer, because people say, oh, imagine I pull out an app and, she's like, kiss me. And you're going, sorry, would you just mind ticking this box to say, so how does it work in a real world? This kind of apps or this kind of thing? Because theoretically it sounds great, but in the real world of passion and sex and everything, can it work?
So I'll go back to the beginning. When the consent module first came about, most rape crisis centres kind of groaned and moaned and went, are you actually kidding me? Where are you going with this? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, get 2 15-year-olds out in Montbellier to consent what consent is. Well, tell me what consent is. And I would get asked that regularly in schools, like, what is this word? So I suppose what it did is, like, I can only use our own university, NUIG. We're very good at this, and they have the consent hubs and they have the education, and so it gave a context. It was the start of a language, and like a lot of language, it either starts down in the street or it starts up in universities. So the consent piece is huge in NUIG and huge in all of our universities. We're doing a lot of training around disclosure and the law and how you manage somebody that discloses sexual violence. So it's a start. But no, there's 100 shades of grey between the yes and the no. So the conversations are needed beforehand, So when we look at consent, we spend 2 hours on consent, would you believe? Now, if you had told me 20 years ago I could speak to anybody about consent for 2 hours, you would have been, laughing. But what it does is it creates a square. It's like, okay, what does consent look like here? And consent changes with relationships, and consent changes as we get 10 years. Every 10 years we age, consent is different. So we need a consent to write it into law. So if you were to look at sex and the law and rape and statutory, consent is everywhere. So again, this normalizes and creates a conversation. So the piece about how do you prove that he or she had consent or consent was given? I mean, there's plays in college written about. So it doesn't. It actually doesn't. But it creates a conversation for everybody to have. So one of my favorite things to say, the 3 C's. Of 15, 16-year-old son has gone out to a party. What does he need? Well, he needs the 3 C's. He needs communication. He needs consent, and he needs condoms. And that's where we go and we build in the consent piece culturally. And it takes 10 years to build in a layer, culture, a change or a shift in culture. Because we were notoriously bad and so saturated in shame. We couldn't talk about sex in a good way, not to mind sex in the darker, bad way. That makes sense. So we were never positive about it. We were never sex positive in Ireland. That's like it just doesn't happen. But what the module of consent does is it's created a language where we're talking about it. And there's layers to consent. And the Galway Rape Crisis Centre are actually doing that work in about 20% of our schools presently. And it worked because what it does is after 2 hours, you have 25 15-year-olds walking out the door that can now talk about consent and all that comes with consent, the kindness, the mutual, the ongoing, the respect. Are you liking this? The yes, that's in the eye contact. So it's non-verbal. There's the body piece. How do you know when somebody is with you? Are they enthusiastic? Do you have eye contact? You don't have somebody that's shut down or too drunk to have sex. Yeah. So we're talking. I'm facilitating these conversations and they're literally coming up to me at the end of the class going, thank you so much, because I now know, I get it now. Where if you're just throwing the word consent out there like they have to in legality.
Is there reciprocation? Like, is it a two-way thing?
It's not any less confusing than it was 30 years ago for those two 15-year-old boys in East Galway, genuinely. It's still complex.
Because see, that word, consent, is kind of like, it's like a wall between people if they were saying, oh, we were going to have sex now and we have to talk about consent. But when you have all the micro pieces and the micro levels broken down, like that reciprocation, are both parties happy? Now, of course, alcohol, drugs, all of these things muddy the waters a bit.
Completely,
yeah. But still, if someone is educated and even if they're on cocaine or on alcohol, at least then, they mightn't have the same kind of foresight, but they'll have some as opposed to having no education.
Some basis. Yeah, some basis for something. Absolutely. It's key. If we're not socially, emotionally and sexually educating our kids, we're going to be in even more trouble down the line. Like right now, there's so many adolescents on waiting lists and rape crisis centres to be seen who are so traumatized, by sexual experiences that we're failing them. We are absolutely failing our kids by letting them into this big wide world and not preparing them whatsoever, like for what they're facing and what they're being asked to do and what's expected of them. And I don't ever want anybody to think that's listening to me that this is a female issue. This is a human issue. Our boys are in trouble. Our boys are in big trouble. They are so confused. They don't know how to flirt. They don't know how to be. They're frightened and nothing good comes out of fear. Except anger.
Explain that more, that when you said they don't know how to flirt, you mean that they're sexually confident?
Yeah. Well, we were always unsexually confident in Ireland, Simon, let's be honest. Not something we were great at without a few pints. So I would say that sometimes, there's flooding of information. So I have several friends, obviously, who work in colleges who have young men in first and second year college coming and going, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I feel like I've been shackled. I'm afraid if I go ahead, if I'm going to be accused of something, literally just at a loss and scared and not feeling good enough and not feeling equipped. And maybe the only healthy sex they've ever seen or any sex at all is in pornography. So they're feeling very not enough, not good enough, very underskilled and not able to have that conversation because they're 21 and they have never had a conversation around sex. They've had fumbly, awkward, messy sex, but they've never had an actual conversation with another human being, which is really sad.
What about the fear then in young men of being falsely accused? Because, of course, we hear some, not often, but some terrible false accusations for certain reasons. But because then we live in a, as you said, there is a rape culture, then you get young men who are, who have no bad intentions, but are feeling like, I don't know, do I want to put myself into that situation? Or, how do I do it? Because, of course, maybe they don't have the education. So, I suppose the biggest fear people have in the future, because the world becomes so politically correct, that people won't go near each other at all because of what could happen.
See, the thing to remember about false accusation, this is where the media are very, they don't really understand. It tends to get blown out of proportion. False accusation is quite rare. And I'm going to give you an English stat. So research done by the Crown Court in the UK. You are more likely as a white male to be raped by another white male than be falsely accused of rape.
Okay,
so that's how rare false accusation is. Where that happens mostly is in teenage circles and where it never gets to an adult. And this is where Galway Rape Crisis Centre were asked in. So false accusation will happen among teenage relationships. And I would say, now I am biased because I do work in a rape crisis centre, 9 times out of 10 there was sex without consent, and 9 times out of 10 the female was intoxicated and groomed into that. But for the most part, I'm breaking this down now, for the most part that female won't report, never report, because that female is so entrenched in his or her own victim blaming that she knows there's no point, which is incredibly sad. So she never gets to a sexual assault treatment unit. She never gets the counselling. She becomes a victim of sexual assault that she's not going to bother because she's read the newspapers, she's seen the court cases, she has seen the victim, the female, thrown out, and the boys have their hands shook, or all of the stories are all there, and we're far more entrenched in victim blaming than we are in the opposite. So we tolerate perpetrators and we double abuse victims.
Yes, I understand.
And the media will run with it. It makes me nauseous. The media will stay with the false accusation.
It's like a bigger story when it's a false accusation.
Not remembering that one false accusation is rare, and that there's 99 more sitting at home going, what's the point? I won't be believed.
I suppose in some ways, though, that because, rape is a very heavy crime, and, if somebody does something and they make that mistake, they have to pay the price. But the thing is, if you have a situation where it's like there is that very rare case where somebody is just out to get revenge against somebody and it gets through, most of the counsellors will probably know, okay, this is not real. There's something wrong with the story here.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I say that.
If it does get past it, then people are kind of shocked to say, well, why would you go that far to ruin somebody's life? So that's why I think it's more of a drama and media frenzy. And it's unfortunately, it's bad for everybody. And even if the guy is perfectly fine, he did nothing wrong. The problem is you've cancelled culture, you're everything. It affects his life. But the problem is it makes it much more difficult for all the other victims to come forward when you have those things, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's what we see. That's the reality, is vast majority of women won't bother. They just won't bother, And it's always worth repeating, that piece of research in the UK. People are blown away by it, as we were when we read it first. It's like, I want to put it on a T-shirt. So as a white male, you're far more likely to be raped by another white male than you are to be falsely accused.
Saying that, a big thing, obviously, you were saying there, you deal with a lot of young men who have been, sexually violated or, abused. So it's a thing because a lot of people will put, the Galway Rape Crisis Centre and centres like this down to helping women, but you help a lot of young men now. Is male rape something that has grown, or the levels of it are higher or lower than in the past?
So I would say male rape has always been there, just like female rape, but we're now talking about it. It's also used in film and that, and it's used as a weapon of war. And how I kind of describe rape to my teenage audience is, for me, for somebody that's worked this long in this hub, for want of a better word, for me, male rape is proof that it has nothing to do with sexual desire or having an orgasm or getting off. All about, intimidating and violating and sexually assaulting somebody else. It's violence.
And power.
So it's control, violence, and power. And it's important to remember that the straight men are raped by other straight men. Now, you do have gay men raping other gay men as well, but for the most part, straight men who get sexually assaulted or raped by other straight men. And that is proof that is it a violent act and nothing at all to do with sexual desire. So it moves, it's anywhere from 9 to 11%. That's probably extremely underreported. So about, they say, like for every woman that comes through the door of a rape crisis centre, only 10% of men will come. And they're a different type of men in terms of they'll be aware of the service. They'll know we see men. So the average male would say, well, there's no place for me in a rape crisis centre because that's where women go. So we've worked hard to break that myth and say, please come for support. We will see you. We will take care of you. We will process this crime with you. We will help you towards paths of healing. Because again, in society, men tend to turn to addictions. They tend to get very angry. They tend to blame themselves even more so than women. And the short-term effects of male violence on male violence is very dramatic and only goes one way if that person isn't supported and held and believed and helped heal in that. So we welcome men, all rape crisis centres in Ireland that welcome men.
And even in your name, it's funny how a name, because you have organizations in Ireland, Women's Aid, and all over the world. So that a name alone can put men off, because, for example, if you were called the Galway Women's Rape Crisis Centre, men would be like, well, I definitely can't go in there because that's not for me. So that simple omission of the word women, where it's for everybody, can it's like a thing where it's not a barrier then, because people are like saying, a lot of men probably in the past were thinking, oh, that's probably only for women. But now it's good that they're realizing these centres are for everybody.
And it's a human crime. Although 94% of perpetrators are male, we still welcome male victims of all sexual violence. That like we would never turn anybody away from our door. So I think it's really important that men hear and know that we're here for them as well.
Okay, so let's say, Susan, with a lot of the work that you've been doing over the last few years, how has it changed from, the work that you've done in the past? Because you mentioned that you use a lot more social media and, it's more online kind of fundraising and everything. But is it easier now or more difficult to start a fundraising campaign?
Well, I think what we're trying to do here in the Rape Crisis Centre is to, as I was saying to you earlier, Simon, is to just highlight what we do. And I think when people realise what you're doing and they become interested in it, they start to volunteer more, they become more open to your campaigns, and they're more likely to support us in our fundraising then as well. So it's really important that we raise our profile within the community, that people are aware that we're here, what we do. As you mentioned there, like some men mightn't even be aware that they can come to the centre. So like getting the chance to have this podcast and to showcase what we do, that in turn then it's like will have a knock-on effect in our fundraising. People will realise the positive impact that we can have within the community and how they can support us by supporting us through our fundraising campaign. So while we raise our profile and people become aware of what we do, it in turn then helps with our fundraising. So it's really key that we get an awareness out there, that we're getting our services highlighted and all what we do into the wider community, so that people know what it is that we're about. Whether it's easier now or harder, it's always hard to fundraise, Simon. There's no easy gig of fundraising. It has changed hugely due to COVID, obviously.
It's always hard, yeah.
The restrictions that came about because of that. As I mentioned earlier, we had to migrate onto online platforms with all our fundraising in the blink of an eye, really, overnight. And all the additional work that comes with that, the learning, for a smaller organization like ourselves, that was a new battleground for us. We continue to use social media. As I said, it's for an awareness raising campaigns as well as our fundraising campaigns, and it does help us reach a wider audience. So in that regard, it is more beneficial for us to be able to get our message across to those that may need our services. With our, awareness raising campaigns, we can reach a younger audience as well. They're all on social media. It's like, as I said, with COVID, that was where they gravitated towards when they couldn't socialize in normal circumstances. It was all online. So the information is available easier for them. It's easier for them to access. So in terms of our online presence, that's been beneficial. We're starting to return to our community events, which is great because, it's very important for smaller communities like Galway City, Galway County, that we're visually present as well to remind people that we are there, that they can support us, because that's how we would have been present prior to COVID with our community events and that. So we're trying to reconnect again to the community, to our volunteers, to our supporters. And that is a reconnection in some ways. It's a reconnection to where we were before COVID. And I know I'm going on about COVID, but with fundraising, that really did impact how we interacted with our volunteers and with our supporters. So it's about learning how to reconnect. I suppose people have been out of the social scene for a while, so it's slowly starting to get back to those events and those links within the community.
One thing you mentioned there, Susan, that a podcast is good for this is that when you talk about like rape and sexual violence, it is a long conversation. We've talked for an hour and a half now nearly about it, and it has to be a long conversation. So the problem is that when you when you see rape mentioned in the media, whether it's like the Late Late Show or, sometimes they're like sound bites because they're 15 minutes maybe of a chat with somebody, or, for example, you could be on the radio promoting a fundraising thing, but you don't get these kind of details, and you don't get these hard questions, and you don't get the kind of detail Michelle was giving us there on local radio. And a lot of it is down to people. People are like, no, we can't talk about that. That's another conversation. So the great thing about podcasts now is we can be more frank, more open. We can say things without censorship, and we can talk about the hard facts and the hard details that people need to hear in order to educate themselves and have that long conversation.
That's so important. I mean, we were delighted, as I know you, Simon, for years. And when I was chatting to you and you were saying about GRCC getting a chance to showcase what we do, really, I suppose, for putting it in that sense, it was, we jumped at the chance because it is very hard to get across what we do, to showcase how positive our services can be to those that may have experienced sexual abuse and trauma, and the importance of people supporting us. And people have shied away from supporting organisations like ours because, again, of the association that other people may have, that if they see somebody supporting us, that, they start thinking, is there a reason behind it, and to bring all this out to the open, to talk within schools, what Michelle is doing, that will get rid of all that.
I
so
understand,
when these teenagers are out in the working world, they're happy to come and volunteer for us. They're happy to come and to do a fundraising event for us because they know the positive impact that their contribution can have to, getting rid. Hopefully that's the main thing. I don't think you can ever get rid of, every negative aspect of sexual abuse and trauma. That probably wouldn't, in an ideal world, that would be, what you'd want, but that's not likely to ever happen. But they know how they can contribute to making it a better place to, by fundraising for us, that we can continue to educate younger people like they're educated within the school system, that we can have counselling where it's needed, and that their small contribution or big contribution, no matter what they do, is going to help have a positive impact, and that they're not going to be thinking twice about volunteering for an organisation like ours because they're so open to the whole idea, from an early age. So I think we touched on it a couple of times and we didn't really go into it, I suppose about the whole religious aspect, that sex and that wasn't talked about, it didn't exist really years ago. So we have been very much moulded through the years by these constraints that have been put on us, wherever they've come from, whether it was through the religious orders or schools or whatever way, or just, again, culturally being passed down and put upon us. So allowing these children to get rid of those ideas and concepts. There's a lot more freedom there for them to make decisions, to fundraise, to work for us, to volunteer. And I'm really hopeful in a few years that we will see that
the schools
we're going to have a lot more volunteers, a lot more people openly fundraising. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned something there that I never really thought of. I was thinking about as you were speaking that you said there that for some people being volunteers or whatever, they mightn't want to be associated because of what other people might think or whatever. So that's something, isn't it? Because if I in the morning say, "Oh, I'm going to do a fundraising thing for Alcoholics Anonymous," and then maybe someone says to me, "Oh, are you an alcoholic or were you an alcoholic?" So there's always an association. So I can imagine in your cases where if people volunteer, maybe they have a fear, oh, people that think I'm a sexual, abuse victim or whatever. So that can maybe be a little bit of a deterrent to them helping, no?
Oh, yeah, totally. It is absolutely a deterrent because it's this whole shame thing that's associated with sexual abuse, that it's always the victim nearly. If you were abused, why? How did you drag it on yourself? What did you do to cause that? And so that is definitely a reason why people wouldn't. It's easier not to.
You have to nearly justify it, like why you're a volunteer, don't you?
And it is, and it's nearly like it's nearly you could draw a parallel there to what happens in court. It's the victim is always justifying or nearly trying to, show themselves in a better light, that it's not their fault. And then people that are volunteering for us, they're nearly like wearing a T-shirt. No, just because I'm volunteering here doesn't mean that I've had a sexual trauma or something. They nearly do feel the need to justify their association. Whereas I think if this is something that's talked about within schools, in the media, and is more mainstream and more acceptable, for want of a better word, I think people are going to be more open to be seen to be associated with us,
It's nearly like you'd need to have a T-shirt that says, "I am not a victim, but I know a victim." You know what I mean?
Well, that's a good T-shirt.
Because the thing is, it's true though, isn't it? Because just being really frank and brutally honest about it, people always have these fears about being associated with things for certain reasons, and they don't. Some people would say, "Oh, well, if I'm doing that, people think I'm a victim, or there's some association with me, or they helped me, or whatever." And it's a shame that's there, isn't it? Because I imagine you'd have far more volunteers, except for those little kind of things, no?
Oh yeah, if it was cancer or heart conditions,
yeah,
much more extended. And like the hospice, an amazing charity, but they are inundated with money. They have people to count their money because everybody knows somebody that's died,
Yes, yes.
Everybody also knows somebody that's been sexually assaulted, abused as a child or a teenager. So, but that's just not nearly as acceptable as.
No.
In saying that, it is getting better. It is. When I first went out on Flag Day and Churchgate Collection, I was abused for holding a bucket.
Really?
Absolutely. And that has changed over the years. And the other thing that I've really noticed is that women are getting angry. They're like, you know what? But no more. So reporting is up.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
It often doesn't go anywhere, but it's up. It's definitely up. So they're more likely to access. Younger people are more likely to access support services. They're more likely to say, look, I have been raped or I have been sexually assaulted. Unlike, again, my generation or my mother's generation that just didn't. They lived with it. So it's changing. And I always use the piece about, when we stopped smoking in pubs, we really got it. Or when we stopped using plastic bags, we really got it in Ireland. So I say to the kids all the time, when we get this, we're good. We won't eradicate sexual violence. It's the dark underbelly of who we are as human beings. We won't eradicate it, but we can stop tolerating it.
It's a mountain with many peaks, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And if we could stop the cultural tolerance, if we could stop the victim blaming, if we could get people, especially victims of child sexual abuse, into courts of law, and we've had 5, I think, in the last 2 weeks on the fronts of our newspapers where their perpetrators were jailed, foster dads and brothers and grandfathers. More of that, unfortunately, is what the public have to get to see so that there is less tolerance. It's the tolerance that's doing more damage. A rape victim will always say to me, it's not what happened, it's how I was received or how I wasn't believed or how that my mother was angry at me because of how I was dressed or I was drinking or I, climbed out the window that night to go to the party at 15. So therefore it was my fault. It is never the victim's fault. Perpetrators choose to hurt, violate, or sexually assault somebody else. What they were wearing, drinking, where they were going, walking down a lane without lights, none of that is relevant. So we have to turn it back onto the perpetrator. And if we can change that, if we can shift society in a way that culturally says no more, let's look at the perpetrator, let's stop blaming the victim. So if my house was broken into and I had a glass door or a glass window, you wouldn't say, well, what were you thinking? Why did you put a glass door in? That was really stupid of you. Glass is so easy to break. It's like, but no,
that was stupid.
No, we wouldn't do that. But we do it to victims of sexual violence every single day in our media, in our court systems. Mothers blame their own daughters rather than having the courage to turn around and say, where's the perpetrator here? Let's look at the perpetrator.
It's like when the dads say, you're not going out dressed like that. And then if something did happen, they're nearly said, well, I pre-warned you, and it's terrible, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's more damning. It's more hurtful. It's what a victim will hold on to, where they might recover from the crime with the right support, but they'll never forget what brother, dad, mum, friends, how their college, how their school. Yeah. So that's why people come into a rape crisis centre and, there is a bubble of support and understanding and knowledge that society, tolerates this horrendous crime and that there's nothing wrong with you. It's society and how we look at it and view it and how we let perpetrators off with it. Meanwhile, the victim is left holding a lifetime of pain, and the only place he or she feels comfortable is a rape crisis centre.
The mental health abuse, like after the fact, is nearly 10 times worse than the actual act. Nothing can seem worse than the act, but when you have to live through that abuse and judgmental people, and, obviously if it goes to court, the mental health part of it is far worse.
Far, far worse.
Totally. It's judgment all the time. It's judgment. The victim is totally judged. And we would have, often say this, that it's like you hear the whole background of the victim during the trial and nothing on the person that has committed this offence. And so the focus should be switched around altogether. Not the victim shouldn't be the one on trial. And that's in essence what happens, I think.
No. Two things I want to address. I want to talk just more about some of your future fundraising things you have in the pipeline, I should say, rather. But before I do, just going back to the sexual assault treatment unit. Okay, so Michelle, for people, girls, boys, men, women, anybody out there who has found themselves in a situation or has been a victim, whether it's been in the past or yesterday or today, can you just explain, like I don't want you to make it very simple, but can you just kind of tell them in a way that if they do go to the sexual assault treatment centre, because I'm sure people are afraid what's going to happen and everything. So could you tell us very briefly, I know you mentioned it before, like the process, and also tell them like how they can do it?
So the sexual assault treatment unit is a unit that is on alert for a call all the time. There's a myth in Ireland that you have to go through the guards. If you're over 18 years of age, you do not have to go through the guards. You can go through us if that's a choice, but you can also private referral. And that's a really big deal to be able to pick up the phone and say, look, I have been sexually assaulted or abused. So ideally, you can be seen within 72 hours. And they say that that's in case you want to have forensics collected. But from our perspective, we would say whether it's been 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 years, or 30 years, it's all about getting in there and getting the medical attention and getting checked. So they do STI checks, they do morning after pill if it's needed. And you will arrive at the unit and you will be met with somebody like myself who does the support. And this is what's going to happen and this is why they do this. Then you'll be met by 2 forensic nurses who will go through the process with you. You'll have a forensic doctor. You will undress with a large piece of paper around you where everything is removed, and they will go. It's a scary process, but the people are so good at what they do that they make it so much easier. It's free, it's confidential, and it is actually on the Toome Road across from the Trappers Inn. So as I said, that a fabulous team of people, a forensic doctor will wait for you and go through the process. From that, if you would like to call the guards, they will call the guards for you and they'll do a preliminary statement. The nurses are now trained to take forensics from orally, and that can be put to one side. Evidence can be kept gathered and kept up for a year until you make your mind up about what you'd like to do with it. Then you are given all of the supports, the web of supports around that. So if you agree to being contacted by somebody on frontline from a rape crisis centre, or you can contact them and then set up a crisis initial. And you can get support from us for up to 6 weeks or longer if needed. A lot of the time it ends up being longer, and that's okay, because one of the things that we're most proud of is we try not to cap our sessions, because just like this conversation, it takes a lot of time sometimes to go through that process and basically get to a place where you can start to forgive yourself, because victims will always blame themselves. So there's a bit of psychological education in there where you're going, no, this was not your fault. And the sexual assault treatment unit now more than ever, it's really important that you get tested for STIs. And those tests come back 3 weeks later, 3 months later. And that medically, you can go back for appointments. Like, it's a really good service. It's something our government pays for that works. It's really effective. As I said, lovely team, self-referral, refer on to ourselves if that's what you want. If you don't want to, you can leave it for a while, but lovely team that will manage that entire process really, really well for you and check that you are okay psychologically, medically, and just support any needs you have around that.
Okay, that's really good. Thank you for that information. And just obviously that, is dealing with more recent stuff as well. So then we'll call them cold cases, or cases that are 10 or 15 years old. Is it a similar process without the forensics?
Yeah, absolutely. You're just checked internally and externally and checked in how you are psychologically. But it's really about, if you feel you have been assaulted or raped and that you may be carrying an STI, that's the piece where you really need to have that checked and make sure that you're okay medically.
Right, okay. So to deal with that straight away.
Deal with that as soon as you can, and then have access to ourselves in terms of support and any questions you might have. I would say for the most part, young people, as resilient as they are in and out of that process really quickly. They don't stay for years. They come in and they have 4, 6, 10 sessions, and they're literally out the gap, back into their lives, hopefully back in school or college, living their lives, compartmentalized this experience, and they can come back to us even when they need to. Our door is always open. We don't cap our service.
Okay, so, just to finish up, Susan, can you tell us about stuff that you have in the pipeline that you can tell us about, obviously, upcoming things that we can kind of promote on the show and let people know about?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to get more into the community, and we've collaborated with a couple of organisations, and we just, after having a lovely summertide session, live music event, and that was just last Friday, Simon, so we're a bit late with that, but it was great to get out into the open, to be visible and to reconnect with the Galway people. So that was a lovely event to start off our summer session, say for. So we are going to be doing Come Dine With Me for GRCC, and that's going to be up and running within the next month or two, so for the summer. And we'll be asking people to hold a garden party, barbecue, dine indoors, whatever the weather allows, al fresco if possible.
Al fresco.
We're not as lucky as you, Simon, over in Spain, but sure, we'll go with it. We'll have the umbrellas. So we'll be getting people to invite family, friends around, groups, and to host a party, whether it's barbecue, whether it's fine dining, whatever they want, and to contribute then to Galway RCC. So it's on behalf of us. So that's going to be up on our social media soon, and that's going to be for the summer. We have our Flag Day this Saturday, so we probably won't be out on the airwaves when that's happening. But as I said, we're delighted to be back in the community. So we're in Galway City, and we'll be out there collecting on Saturday, and it's great to have our volunteers re-engaged and some of our corporate partners supporting us there, and other corporates. So that's really interesting as well. And it's great, as I said, to be out and about and visible within the community, and to let people know we're still there. Our service is still there for them, and we still believe them and are there to support them. So I said, visibility is really good. We'll have another Flag Day later on in the year in November, but that's another while off. And our Churchgate collections. So our community events are back up and running. We'll see how we get on with those. Hopefully there'll be no more hiccups like we've had before. So, so we're also having the pipeline another bigger event, but
Great.
myself and Michelle, we're just discussing it before we were on with you. So we're not going to say too much about that. But what we might do is, if we get a chance, we might come on and let you know what's going on some other point on another podcast if that suits.
Definitely, yeah, and we can promote anything for you guys.
Yeah, so once we have more details on that and we have more people tied in, their arms twisted to take part in that, we will come back and let you know. But we're still we have on our website, we have once-off donation, and also what we're trying to promote is recurring donations, and we have a facility on our website for that. And with the recurring donation, it allows us to plan ahead because we know what income is coming in. It allows us to plan more projects, more in-house supports and that, because we know there's an income stream coming in, and anybody can set up that, and it's on our website. It's galwayrcc.ie, and it's very simple. So they can do one-off donation there, or they can set up a recurring donation. And any amount is welcome, whether that's €5 a month or up to €21 a month. Then they can get tax back on that, or we can get tax back on that rather. So yeah, there's quite a few things there, and we're always open to people fundraising for us, because it's just me really in the fundraising department. So anyone that wants to come in and do it, there's only so much I can do. So any help is really appreciated, any ideas. So yeah.
Yes, of course. Well, you're doing a great job there, Susan, and you've done a lot of great projects for fundraising. So keep it up. So, ladies, and Michelle as well, I want to say, thank you for all the information, and it's been really, helpful, and there's lots of great resources there. And with these kind of things, whether it's information for teens, for young boys, for girls, victims, anybody who's involved in this circle of, sex, violence, rape, all of these things affects people in some ways. And even if it's friends or families that can help them by listening to this show and helping somebody, it's a great thing. So I want to thank you for coming on and giving us all this information, and best of luck with everything. And, commend you and say well done for all the great work you're doing, and long may it continue and grow. Now, obviously, it's a delicate subject, and we hope all those cases go down. But in a real world, that probably won't happen. So all I want to say is continue the great work you're doing. It's fabulous. And thank you very much, Michelle and Susan from the Galway Rape Crisis Centre, for coming on the Collective Whisper podcast.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle Caulfield and Susan Costello from the Galway Rape Crisis Centre. It was a very intriguing chat and very informative. And thank you very much for taking the time to come on and tell us all about your wonderful organisation and the great work you do for rape victims all across Galway and Connacht and everywhere. And we want to thank you and commend you for all the work you've done over the last few years and the great work that you continue doing every day. And we wish you the best with all your fundraisers, and we urge people to give what they can and to help you whenever they can, and also to volunteer for such a wonderful organisation. And unfortunately, this type of organisation, we shouldn't need it, but in today's society, people are still not as informed, and people still have these things going on in their lives. And it's great that there's something there that can help people who have had problems in the past and continue to have problems from sexual abuse and the implications that comes after it. So thank you once again, ladies, and thank you to the Galway Rape Crisis Centre. Okay, everybody, we're glad you liked the show, and we're glad you continue listening, and we want to thank you for staying here with us, and we hope that the content is to your liking. And we just want to say, please feel free to share the show with your friends, subscribe where you see the button, follow where you see the button, but most of all, stay listening, because we enjoy having you here, and it's, you that makes the show, the people who listen. So thank you very much for that. My name is Simon Kay. This is the Collective Whisper podcast, and until we see you next time, take care of yourself, your family, and everyone else you love. Bye-bye.